And so if you want to follow along in your Bibles, Psalm 15 is where we're going to be. I don't have the text itself on the screen through most of the lesson. Of course, it's not a long psalm. It's 5 verses, Psalm 15. And so we're going to spend our time today looking at it. And so let's go ahead, first of all, and read the text, Psalm 15, a psalm of David. Lord, who may abide in your tabernacle? Who may dwell in your holy hill? He who walks uprightly and works righteousness and speaks the truth in his heart. He who does not backbite with his tongue, nor does evil to his neighbor, nor does he take up a reproach against his friend, in whose eyes a vile person is despised, but he honors those who fear the Lord. He who swears to his own hurt and does not change. He who does not put out his money at usury, nor does he take a bribe against the innocent. He who does these things shall never be moved. So verse 1 poses 2 questions. And the remainder of the psalm is used to answer those 2 questions. And it's important to notice, first of all, to whom the questions are posed. David's not asking his neighbor, who's going to do this. He's not even asking one of the priests or the Levites or a prophet. He wants to know from the Lord. Lord, who may abide in your tabernacle, and who may dwell in your holy hill? He inquires of the Lord. These are monumental questions, and they are not to be left up to man's whims or desires or preferences. It doesn't matter what you and I think about who should be able to go and be with the Lord or not. That's not the determining factor. It's too easy for men to be partial, to allow things that we ought not, and to exclude things maybe that we don't like or that we find too tough or whatever it be. And so, just as an illustration, go ask a few preachers, what must I do to be saved? And unfortunately, you're going to get a bunch of different answers. Well, God only gives one answer. The scriptures give a single answer. And so we want to know, what does God say? And that's David's inquiry. Lord, I want you to tell me. I want you to reveal it. And of course, David was a prophet. David received revelation by the Spirit of God. And so, Lord, who may abide in your tabernacle? Who may dwell in your holy hill? Now, I said 2 questions, and I understand there's 2 question marks, but most people looking at that would think, well, hang on, it's the same question, just being asked twice. It actually isn't. There are 2 distinct questions being asked here. He is not asking the same thing in different words on 2 different occasions. They are distinct. Now, the words are related, no doubt about that, and yet the questions are different. And so let's first of all note the wording that is used. Who may abide in your tabernacle? Who may dwell in your holy hill? Abide and dwell. We use those synonymously. We would use them interchangeably. But the Hebrew words that are used by the psalmist here are quite different. So first of all, the word for abide that he uses, the Hebrew word is gor. It means to turn aside from the road like a traveler who's seeking lodging, to assemble or gather, to sojourn, or to be an inhabitant. That's sort of a summary of what we've got there on the screen from Strong's Exhaustive Concordance. And then the word dwell, who may dwell in your holy hill. The word dwell is the Hebrew word shakan. And it means to reside or permanently stay, to abide or continue to inhabit or to remain. Now again, it sounds sort of similar, but do you see the difference between these 2? There is an obvious difference. The first one, abide, or the Hebrew gor, is temporary. This is something about a pilgrim or a sojourner who stays for a time. Lord, who may abide in your tabernacle? Whereas the latter one, the word dwell or sakan in the Hebrew, is permanent. This is one who is at home for good. And so that's the distinction of the questions here. Now, the questions are related, no doubt. But the tabernacle was a temporary and movable arrangement for worship. And even when the temple is built by Solomon, it's still temporary. That thing got destroyed, right? And those who worship there, that wasn't the end of it for them. They would eventually pass away. And so there's something else. And for you and I today, assembling with the church is temporary. Now, these are the people that we expect to also spend eternity with among many, many, many more. But this is the temporary. Whereas the holy hill is permanent and immovable. It is Zion. It is the heavenly Jerusalem. It is our eternal hope in heaven. And so that's the distinction of the questions. Again, they are related questions. Those who abide in the tabernacle, we should expect to find in the holy hill. And if someone did not abide in the tabernacle of the Lord, then they're not going to be in the holy hill of God either. And so they are related, but the questions certainly are two different questions. So the rest of the psalm then provides the answer to these questions. And it's a multifaceted answer. There's not just a single statement. There's a whole bunch of things. And he doesn't give us everything that he could give, right? There's 5 verses here, 4 verses of answer. There's a whole lot more he could give, but this is a very good summary of the response to these questions. And so, who may abide in your tabernacle? Who may dwell in your holy hill? So notice at verse 2, he says, he who walks uprightly and works righteousness and speaks the truth in his heart. Those who walk with integrity and in truth. That's what he generically says in the verse. The word that's rendered uprightly here in the New King James is defined by Strong's in this way. Strong says entire, or with integrity or truth, without blemish, complete, full, perfect, sincerely, sound, without spot, undefiled, upright, or whole. In the Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. The Greek word that is used here is the word teleos. The word teleos is elsewhere translated in our English translations as perfect, complete, or mature. And so the first thing he says is these need to be mature individuals, people who are growing in their faith. You know, he's saying that we need to grow up and we need to be in the image of God. The same call is made time and again in the New Testament. Matthew chapter 5, verse 43 beginning, Jesus says, you have heard it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet your brethren only, what do you do more than others? Do not even tax collectors do so? Therefore you shall be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. That word perfect in the text is this word. The idea of walking upright, the Greek word teleos, of perfect, complete. And when we think about perfect, typically what comes to our mind is we just wrote a test and we got 100 out of 100, right? That's the common concept of perfect in our modern age. That is not what this word teleos means. It deals with maturity. It deals with completeness. It deals with us having grown up and being an imitator of God. 1 Corinthians 14, verse 20, brethren, do not be children in understanding. However, in malice be babes, but in understanding be mature. It's the same word. He wants us to grow up and to be mature. Again, in Hebrews chapter 5, verse 12, beginning, for though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the first principles of the oracles of God. You've come to need milk and not solid food. For everyone who partakes only of milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. But solid food belongs to those who are of full age. That's our word right there. Those who are of full age, those who have grown up. And so the very first thing he says here is, The Lord expects us to be perfect, of full age, mature, complete, and whole. It doesn't mean sinless. It doesn't mean without fault. But the closer we get to that, then the less we will give in to temptation. And the more and more we will become like God. Lord, who may abide in your tabernacle, who may dwell in your holy hill? He's looking for children. Those who are in his image, those who are in his likeness, those who are taking on his character. And so those who walk upright is the first answer. Still in verse 2, he says that it's also those who work righteousness. Those who work righteousness. Now, righteousness and holiness before the Lord is not a theoretical or abstract thing. God's people are called to work righteousness, to actually do something, to do good. When Paul was writing to Titus, he emphasized the need for Christians to do good when he's writing to him. Titus, it's just that short little book, right? 3 chapters in the book of Titus. None of them are large chapters, but listen to the emphasis that Paul makes on doing good works. In chapter 1 and verse 8, Paul said that one who is going to serve as an elder must be a lover of what is good. 1 and verse 16, he warned against those who profess to know God, but in works deny him, being abominable, disobedient, and disqualified for every good work. Chapter 2, verse 3, the older women among the saints are to be teachers of good things. Chapter 2, verse 7, Titus, you're to show yourself a pattern of good works. 2, verse 14, Paul says that Jesus gave himself for us that he might redeem us from every lawless deed and purify for himself his own special people, zealous for good works. 3 and verse 10, Christians are to be subject to the rulers and authorities, to obey and to be ready for every good work. 3 verse 8, those who have believed in God should be careful to maintain good works. 3 verse 14, let our people learn to maintain good works to meet urgent needs, that they may not be unfruitful. You can't read the book of Titus without coming away from that, all right, I got to be doing good things. God's expectation of me is that I need to be doing good. Now, let me give a little bit more disclosure here of why Paul focuses so much on that, because in all, there are 11 references to good works in Titus. And the reason he's doing that is in chapter 1, those that are around Titus, the Cretans, are identified by one of their own as lazy beasts and evil gluttons. And so Paul, with that report, and he says it's a true report. And so Titus, you have a really, really difficult job here. You need to stress to these people good works. God expects us to do good works. But that is, again, from the Psalm, that's one of the things that God expects of us if we're going to abide in his tabernacle and eventually dwell in his holy hill. And so the message is not just for Titus. It permeates the New Testament. In fact, it permeates the entire Bible, both Old and New Testament. All right, still in verse 2, he says the faithful servant of God is one who is going to speak the truth in his heart. God's people are called to be people of truth, to be focused on truth, to love the truth, to live out the truth. In John chapter 8, verse 31 and 32, we are to know it and to abide in it. If you abide in my word, you are my disciples indeed. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. In Ephesians chapter 4 and at verse 15, we are to speak the truth in love, that we may grow up in all things into him who is the head, which is Christ. We're to be focused on the truth. Again, Ephesians chapter 4, verse 25, speak the truth with your neighbor. And so that's in contrast with telling lies. Those who are prone to telling lies, they won't abide in his tabernacle. They won't have the hope of dwelling in his holy hill. And so we need to be focused on truth. Solomon spoke about the need for us to be truthful. In Proverbs chapter 12 and at verse 19, he said, the truthful lips shall be established forever, but a lying tongue is but for a moment. And again in 12 and verse 22, lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who deal truthfully are his delight. Now, if we ever think that being dishonest is not really that big of an issue, go ask Ananias and Sapphira. Well, you won't get the chance to ask them, but go read about them. Acts chapter 5. We've got this married couple, Ananias and Sapphira, and what they did, everybody's selling property and bringing the proceeds to the apostles so that it can be distributed among needy saints, and they sold a property. But when they brought the proceeds, or a portion of the proceeds, and it was fine to bring a portion. They didn't have to bring the whole proceeds. In fact, Peter, when he's talking with them, he says, when before you sold it was not yours, and after you sold it was not in your control. It was up to you how much you bring. But they brought a portion of the proceeds and inferred that it was the whole price, that they had given all that they had received for this property. And so they laid that at the apostles' feet, and there we go. Now, it was a silly and useless lie. It's one of those fibs that people tell in order to make themselves seem better than they really are, or to have done more than they really did. It's what people today refer to as a white lie, right? Who's going to get hurt by them saying this? They are. They're the ones who got hurt by them saying this. And so listen to what the Apostle Peter had to say to them. To Ananias, he says this: why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit? Well, what's the issue? Well, those who are going to abide in the tabernacle and dwell in the holy hill, they speak the truth. Ananias did not. Why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit? Why have you conceived this thing in your heart? You have not lied to men, but to God. Verse 5 of the text says, Ananias, hearing these words, fell down and breathed his last. God judged him then and there, and he died. About 3 hours later, Sapphira comes in. She doesn't know that her husband is dead. And Peter asked of her, did you actually sell it for this? And she maintains the lie. She doesn't say, well, no, actually, we only brought a portion of what we sold. That's how much we sold it for. Absolutely. Verse 9, Peter rebukes her. How is it that you have agreed together to test the Spirit of the Lord? Look, the feet of those who have buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out. Do you see Peter's concern, both when he's talking to Ananias and to Sapphira? You've not lied to men. Now, they did lie in front of men, but the greater issue here is your sin is against God. All sin is against God. And so you have lied to God. God's expectation of those who will be with him is that they speak the truth. And so both of them perished. God expects us to be truthful in all things. That's a trait of those who are going to be his in the here and now and in eternity. Verse 3. In verse 3, the psalmist writes this. He says, he who does not backbite with his tongue, nor does evil to his neighbor, nor does he take up a reproach against his friend. So in verse 2, the writer gave us 3 positive traits. Walk uprightly, work righteousness, speak the truth. In verse 3, he speaks out against the opposite of those 3. And so we're to walk uprightly, therefore we don't take a reproach against our friends. We are to work righteousness, therefore we do not do evil. We're to speak the truth, therefore we're not those who are backbiting. And so this is the mirror image, if you will, of what was given in verse 2. And so now what does it mean to backbite? The Hebrew word here is ragal. It means to be a talebearer or a slanderer. Merriam-Webster defines the word backbite as to say mean or spiteful things about a person. Dictionary.com says to attack the character or reputation of a person who is not present, to speak unfavorably or slanderously of a person who is not present. Thus, something you do behind their back, backbiting, without them hearing, without them knowing about it. Now, in Ephesians chapter 4 and at verse 31, Paul commands, let all bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, evil speaking be put away from you with all malice. That backbiting needs to go. There's no place for that in the heart of the child of God. Instead, he says, be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, just as God in Christ forgave you. That's verse 32. Listen to Paul's warning to the Galatians. Galatians 5, verse 15. He says, if you bite and devour one another, beware lest you be consumed by one another. If all you're doing is biting at each other, the end result is going to be destruction of all. And so God does not want his people backbiting or being slanderous or engaging in gossip of any kind. Verse 3 continues, nor does evil to his neighbor. Those who will abide in his holy tabernacle and dwell in the holy hill, they refrain from doing evil. We already said they work righteousness, but that means they have to not do evil. Specifically, the psalmist here focuses on how we treat our neighbor. Well, who's our neighbor? Luke chapter 10, one of the teachers of the Jews had that question for Jesus. Remember, we'll just go on over there for a moment. Luke chapter 10, we typically refer to it as the parable of the Good Samaritan. And so in Luke 10 and at verse 25 beginning, a certain lawyer stood up and tested him, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? He said to him, what is written in the law? What is your reading of it? So he answered and said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, you have answered rightly, do this, and you will live. Now, if this man were wise, he'd have just walked away. Thank you very much, and off he goes. But that's not what happened, because he was not wise. But he, wanting to justify himself, said to Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Now, the original question, which wasn't a very good question to catch Jesus up, but that's what he was trying to do, Jesus answered very easily. In fact, what Jesus did is he got the man to answer his own question. But then now he's sort of playing off the cuff, and you know, that doesn't work well sometimes. If you've been in public speaking and you stray from your notes and go chasing after rabbits, sometimes you don't find rabbits, right? And that's sort of what happened with this guy, is he got started to, okay, well, that didn't work out well. Okay, let me think. All right, so who's my neighbor then? Thinking he's going to catch Jesus on that. And so Jesus gave us this parable. Remember the man who fell among thieves along this road from Jerusalem to Jericho, and then he pictures for us three individuals who came by. There's a priest who comes by, there's a Levite who comes by, and both of them pass by on the other side. They've got no interest in getting involved in this, and we don't know the details of it, and it's just a story. But with the two of them, it's hypocritical, because they are either going down to Jerusalem to serve at the temple, or they're coming back from Jerusalem having just served at the temple. That's the only reason why they would be on that road. Jericho is a Levitical city. That is one of the cities that was given to the Levites. And so they would go on this particular road, which was a dangerous road, to get back and forth between Jerusalem. And why go to Jerusalem? Well, you're not going there for groceries. They get their groceries. Well, actually, they grow their things and have their own animals and so forth. But they're going down there to work, or coming back because they've been at the temple working. And so for them, it's hypocritical. The Samaritan comes along and he helps the man. And this had to be difficult for the religious leader who started this conversation, because Jesus then asked him at the end of the whole thing, so who showed mercy on him? And, you know, basically, who's his neighbor? And, you know, who's his neighbor? It's the one who showed mercy. Go and do likewise, is what the Lord said. And so who's our neighbor? It's whoever we come across that needs help. That's who our neighbor is. And so not an evildoer to his neighbor, not an evildoer to anybody. That's the long and short of it. And so there's just no occasion or situation where doing evil is justified. It doesn't matter what someone else has done to us. There's no time when doing evil is justified. Over in Romans chapter 12, the Apostle Paul addresses this towards the latter part of the chapter, that regardless what people do to us, we need to do good to them. Verse 17, repay no one evil for evil, have regard for good things in the sight of all men. If it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. Beloved, do not avenge yourselves, but rather give place to wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Therefore, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him a drink. For in so doing, you will heap coals of fire on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. The psalmist says, don't do evil to your neighbor. Paul says, do good to your enemy. And so God expects us to be doing good. Don't be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Again, from verse 3, those who are the Lord's do not take up a reproach against his friend. The word reproach here, it's the Hebrew word charpa, it means to strip or make bare, to deprive one of his garments, to dishonor, disgrace, or shame. We don't want to dress down. He's not talking literally, he's talking figuratively. We don't want to dress down somebody to bring shame or embarrassment to them. That is not the way to deal with things. We see a brother or a sister who is in sin. That's not the way to address it. We address it in a respectful way, in a way that's going to be helpful, not in a way that's going to draw them down and embarrass them and shame them in some way. We need to be cognizant how we treat people. And those who are in sin, again, don't overlook the sin, but be cautious how we address it. Those who are poor, the poor are often reproached and mistreated. Don't do that. Do not reproach individuals. In our approach to people, we need to be careful not to debase them, not to humiliate them, not to ridicule them. We want to treat people with respect. God treats us with respect. He expects us to be imitators of him. He wants us to be a source of encouragement, a source of help. Over in Colossians chapter 1 and verse 21 beginning, he says, you once were alienated and enemies in your mind by wicked works, yet now he has reconciled in the body of his flesh through death to present you holy and blameless above reproach in his sight. God has exalted us, and he says, you're above reproach. Therefore, don't go reproaching people. That is not a part of the character of God's people. Verse 4, it says, in whose eyes a vile person is despised, but he honors those who fear the Lord. He who swears to his own hurt and does not change. This calls for us to have discernment, to have the ability to judge right from wrong. We already referenced Hebrews chapter 5, verse 14, but again, remember the writer there said that those who are of full age are those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern good and evil. God expects you and I to know right from wrong. And not only to know right from wrong, but then to desire to uphold and support that which is right, and to oppose and condemn that which is wrong. Remember, Isaiah warned the people of his generation in Isaiah chapter 5, verse 20, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. We should not exalt or give honor or give place to those things that are evil. The fact is, despising evil and wicked things in today's world is not always a popular thing. That's going to bring judgment upon you by others. We live in a world that promotes and honors wickedness and wicked people, and equally, the world will often vilify and malign those who do good and who are focused on good and exalt good. But we're not concerned about popularity. We're concerned about what's right and wrong. And so we need to despise that which is evil. We need to honor that which is good and those who fear the Lord. He who swears to his own hurt and does not change. Have you ever been playing a game, whatever the game was, cards, chess, a board game, all kinds of things that would fit in this, and one of your opponents, when they realized that they did something that was detrimental to their success in the game, relents and wants a do-over. Can I undo that last move that I did, right? That's a fairly insignificant example, but some want to do that in weightier matters. And that's what he's addressing here when he says, who swears to his own hurt and does not change. When we have committed to doing something, then we need to do what we committed to do. We need to be people of our word. And so even if the commission of doing so brings about some unforeseen struggles or difficulties, hardships, even financial troubles, we will continue to do what we said we were going to do. Solomon wrote in Ecclesiastes 5, beginning at verse 2, "Do not be rash with your mouth, and let not your heart utter anything hastily before God, for God is in heaven and you on earth. Therefore let your words be few. For a dream comes through much activity, and a fool's voice is known by his many words. When you make a vow to God, do not delay to pay, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you have vowed. Better not to vow than to vow and not pay." Now, he's dealing with a vow before God, but the principle applies in all situations. In fact, as you go into the law, you'll see the law expected God's people to keep their word. You give your word, you keep your word. Let me give you an example. So in the days of the divided kingdom, King Amaziah, who is the king in Judah, he was preparing to go to war against the Edomites. It's 2 Kings chapter 25 is the context here. And so he gathered together the men of Judah and preparing them, those who are able to go to war, and he has 300,000 men at his disposal. But when he looks at 300,000 men and he thinks about the Edomites and the number of men that they'll have, my army's not big enough. And so what he does, concerned that this isn't enough, he goes to Israel, which is his neighbor to the north, and he hires 100,000 of their mighty men to join the battle with him. And what he's going to do is he pays 100 talents of silver to the treasury of Jehoahaz, who is the king up in Israel. So 100 talents of silver. Let's put that in modern day terms. 100 talents of silver is about 7,500 pounds of silver. And it would be valued at about $3.6 million. So he just paid $3.6 million to the king of Israel to hire some of his soldiers. Not the lower ones either. These are the mighty men. These are the great soldiers of Israel. So Amaziah now feels confident because he's going to war with 400,000 men, but then a prophet shows up at his doorstep. And you know when a prophet shows up at your doorstep, I did something I shouldn't have done. And so the prophet says, "O king, do not let the army of Israel go with you, for the Lord is not with Israel." In fact, he warns in verse 8 of the text that if the Israelite soldiers do go with him, you will fall before your enemy. Go with your 300,000 men, leave that 100,000, send them home. You take them with you, you are going to end up perishing. Verse 9, Amaziah asked, "But what shall I do about the 100 talents which I have given to the troops of Israel?" I've already committed to pay them for their service. $3.6 million worth of pay. What do I do about that? Do I ask for the money back? Do I send them away with the money? What do I do? And all that the man of God has to say to him is this: the Lord is able to give you much more than this. Keep your word. Do not take them with you, but you go ahead and you pay them just as you said you were going to do. Again, what did the psalmist say? He who swears to his own hurt and does not change. Amaziah needed to pay out the money, even if he wasn't going to take them with him, because he had already committed to pay them. Keep your word, bear the cost, trust in God. If we have given our word, then we're bound by our word. James chapter 5 and verse 12 says, "Let your yes be yes, let your no be no." If our yes is not yes and our no is not no, then how can people trust us? And how are we speaking the truth, as we've already talked about, if our yes is not yes and our no is not no? And when we break our promises, what we do is we damage our reputation. But not only do we damage our reputation, it reflects upon our faith and it reflects upon the Lord. And so we need to be people of our word. We need to be trustworthy. If our fellow man can't trust what we say, then how can God trust when we say that we're going to serve him to the end? And so we need to be trustworthy. The only exception to this would be if we have agreed to do something which is wrong, something that is sinful. If we agreed to go and rob a bank with somebody, guess what? We're not going to go rob the bank because that's wrong. That would be something that we need to bow out from that. Let me give you a biblical, for instance, on this. Judges chapter 11. Remember Jephthah? Jephthah is brought in by his brothers in order to lead the men of the army to go up against their enemy. And so he says to God, if you bring me back victorious over my enemy, then I'm going to give whatever comes out of my house first as a burnt offering to the Lord. Now, that's a rash vow. He didn't think that through. Like, what did he think? The first thing that was going to come out was going to be a lamb to meet him when he got home, right? And so off he goes, and the Lord gives him victory over his enemies, and he comes back home, and the first thing to come out of his door is his daughter, his only daughter, his only child. Well, he can't offer his daughter as a burnt offering. That would be sinful. Now, I do know some who say that he did offer his daughter as a burnt offering. I am convinced that he did not. The text doesn't say 100% one way or the other, but there are some options available to him, and there's some things that are written in the text that tell me that he didn't burn his daughter on an altar. What I do believe he did is that he offered her to serve at the tabernacle for the rest of her life. And so she would never marry and would never bear children, and his lineage ceased right there. But he could not burn her as a sacrifice. That would be against God's law. But listen now, Leviticus chapter 5, verse 4 through 6, it says, if a person swears, speaking thoughtlessly with his lips to do evil or to do good, whatever it is that the man has pronounced by an oath, and he is unaware of it, when he realizes it, then he shall be guilty in any of these matters. And it shall be that when he is guilty in any of these matters, he shall confess that he has sinned in that thing, and he shall bring a trespass offering to the Lord for his sin which he has committed. God actually had in the law a stipulation where if you have agreed to do something that is evil, it was sinful to make the promise in the first place, you make a sin offering for that. You don't continue with the vow. If a person has spoken thoughtlessly with his lips to do evil, pronounce this oath, he's unaware, didn't know that it was evil at the time, maybe, whatever it be, we need to be careful about what we say and what we agree to do. But we cannot keep an evil promise. But every good promise we need to keep, even if it's to our own hurt. Last thing, verse 5, he who does not put his money out at usury, nor does he take a bribe against the innocent, he who does these things shall never be moved. God's people need to know that money is not the end-all and be-all of life, that we're here for a relatively short time, and when we amass all kinds of money, we can't take it with us. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't earn a good wage. It's not to say that we shouldn't seek opportunities for advancement. That's not to say that we shouldn't make wise decisions in investing that are going to bring us a profit. All of that is good and right. But we need to be upright in the way that we do all that. And again, our focus not on wealth. He who does not put out his money at usury is what the psalmist has said. Usury is defined by Oxford Dictionary as the illegal action or practice of lending money at unreasonably high rates of interest. The law of Moses forbade usury. In Exodus 22, verse 25, if you lend money to any of my people who are poor among you, you shall not be like a moneylender to him. You shall not charge him interest. You're not going to profit off the backs of your poor brethren. Do not do that. The Lord didn't want his people taking advantage of one another and creating further hardship in order for one to profit off the other. Nor does he take a bribe against the innocent, the psalmist continued. So our sense of right and wrong and our ability to exercise judgment and make decisions should not be clouded through receiving a bribe. Bribes have this way of making people do things and make decisions that they otherwise would not have. Exodus chapter 23, verse 6, you shall not pervert the judgment of your poor in his dispute. Keep yourself far from false matters. Do not kill the innocent and the righteous, for I will not justify the wicked. And you shall take no bribe, for a bribe blinds the discerning and perverts the words of the righteous. Those who are walking with God, who abide in his tabernacle and who will dwell in his holy hill, cannot be bought. And it's not that, oh, well, we wouldn't succumb to it if the situation were to avail itself upon us. We don't want the situation. He does not put his money out at usury, nor does he receive a bribe. We say no. We're not going to do things of that nature. We're not going to take advantage of others for our gain, but rather we're willing to give and to serve and to meet needs. That's the call for God's people. Don't pervert righteousness because someone's willing to pay us off. Right is right, wrong is wrong. And that is the end of it. So we need to be honest in our financial dealings. He closes the psalm out with this statement: he who does these things shall never be moved. This is the character of those who are God's people, of those who are his in the here and now, and of those who will be with him in eternity. And so if we pattern ourselves after God's image and we seek to be imitators of the Lord, we can have surety of heaven. Yeah, the question that's asked here, he's wanting to know the answer so that I can be assured that I'm among them. You and I can have assurance that we're going to be with the Lord if we will walk as he commands. And so we need to be people who are walking uprightly, who are working righteousness, who speak the truth, who are not backbiting, not doing evil things, not bringing reproach upon people, able to discern between good and evil and doing that which is good, demonstrating integrity, even if it's to our own harm. We're going to keep our word and not greedy. And if we will do that, then we can have the assurance that, yes, God is pleased with us, that we are what he has called us to be, and that we'll be with him in eternity. We can help you in some way. We can be an encouragement to you to build you up in the faith. If you need our prayers, if there's something we can do in order to help your faith, let us know what it is that we can do as we stand together and sing.